Well, I did not mean to click that one and change the screen, but it's 6 o'clock, so I guess it's time to start anyways. Hello, everybody. This is Thinking Wage Art and Science stream, and today on the schedule I said we'll be doing space, although I don't really have anything too exciting planned. So by space, I figure I'd just show you a little bit more of the production behind some of my nice planetary scenes. Now, because this is because I'll be working in Blender today, the first thing I'm going to do is demolish the default cube. Farewell. Oh, wait a second, no, I'm in the wrong form of Blender. Yes, the form of Blender does matter. The second one... Let's see. The one that I opened up was 2.9, the final official release of Blender. Whereas some of the stuff I'll be doing will require us to be working in 3.0 alpha, which does have a few more experimental features that will make this really pop. Let's switch over to the Eevee renderer, simply so that we can speed this process up a little bit. And since it's in space, you know, there's no atmosphere, so we don't have to worry about the indirect lighting. Let's make this an icosphere. Okay, so at 6 we're still have a nice resolution to make this look like a sphere while being able to keep our high frame rates so nothing's going to catch fire. I really do not want that. Now, like I said, this week we're not going to be doing anything real crazy in terms of scientific discussions or anything like that. Rather instead, I thought we'd do some fun stuff to show you some of my gosh. Just showing off some inspiration, you know. A little something to get the mind going. Little brainstorming sessions, the 3D equivalent of a doodle. And that is procedural generation. Which is what Blender is really good for, evidently. Let's see, the sun is going to be very, very far away. So, in terms of angle, we're going to apparently that doesn't make that big of a difference in the Eevee render. It does in cycles, I believe. But yes, one of the cool things about Blender is that you can it's that, you know, when you're oh gosh, this is why I should plan these things out so I don't turn into a stammering mess while I'm talking to an audience of who knows how many. Anyways, sometimes when I'm feeling really mentally blocked, it's a really fun thing to come into Blender and play with some of the procedural stuff. For instance, the noise texture here, the way it can be used in the material editor, it can come up with a billion different solutions that can really vary depending on what you want to. It can really it can really add a bunch of. Oh gosh, what am I trying to say? It can really add a lot of variation depending on what you're using with it. I've used it for basically any material that I'm trying to use that adds a little bit of randomness to it. So let's and in planets, that's probably the and when talking about planets, it's really useful when talking about planetary surfaces. You know, that's probably the most basic example you could come up with. For instance, let's just use a value input here because we'll be coming back to this a lot. And here we already have a pretty decent map. And you know, we can add and subtract a lot to it. We can control the smoothness. We can break up the land masses a lot more. And in Blender, we can use this to mix a couple different shaders together. So let's use this as a mixed shader output. And shader 1 sorry, like I said, this is something when I'm really mentally stumped for some reason. So do not be too worried if I just sort of go, if I just sort of either go off the rails or just stop talking for several minutes at a time. I am just sort of figuring these things out as I go. Okay, so to sort of distinguish between these two, I'm going to make this the water, and make this the land. And actually, since this is an alien planet, I can feel free to make this a little reddish. Almost looks like the surface of Mars. I mean, you've probably seen a couple of those speculative maps of what Mars would look like if it had water. Especially from this angle, Mars, its top half is a lot shallower and a lot less mountainous than the bottom half, and so we can predict that if it had water, its top half would basically be one big ocean. Although here we can clearly see that this isn't supposed to be Mars at all. Just a fun little piece of trivia there. Let's add a frame here. Label this oceans. And let's color this a light blue to distinguish it from this one down here. Let's call this frame land masses. And we'll make this one sort of brownish. Okay, there we go. And as you can see, this looks like a plastic ball in the UV renderer. It is not very good looking by any means necessary. So let's just sort of, dive into this. Let's see. Let's add a little math note to this to try to get the real depth of the oceans. Here, let's bring the detail down a bit so it's not so laggy while we're doing this. The real problem with using procedural materials like this is that while it is in some ways it is really nice, and it does get the it does get you some pretty interesting results when you're looking for something random. It is also very labor intensive on the computer that you're using, so depending on the hardware you have, it can be a really slow process. There we go. I think that looks pretty nice overall. Let's focus on one thing at a time, so let's just leave the ocean color as it is right there. And let's focus a little bit on the land masses. Okay, converter color ramp. Let's make this somewhat Earth-like. So let's get some plains and deep forests in there. Maybe add some mountains. Let's see, at the scale of planets, you usually can't make out the gradients between plains and forests and mountains too well, so you can switch out to this constant mode, which doesn't really blend all these different values together. Or these aren't values, I guess. The correct term here is hues or tones, just colors. Make this a little bit darker. See what this looks like with the oceans. Alright, not bad, not bad. Make this a nice wild looking jungle planet. And yeah, as you can see, as you turn the detail up, it sort of blurs those values together for us. Although we can still tweak these a little bit. Coastlines are not normally that big. Alright, fit that in there. And now let's start working on these materials. Important thing when looking at in from space is that when you look at land and water, you can see pretty obviously that they are not the same material at all. Water is normally several times more reflective, as we can see in this case, specular. We don't want to move for specular entirely. I mean, a little bit of specularity not only is more realistic, but also it is a lot more interesting. All right. Now that in itself is a pretty interesting looking planet, but is still missing a lot. I guess we can start right here. We can start by changing things in the terrain a little bit. Now everything's being handled by this little noise node here. Thank goodness for that. Let's make it a little bit of a bump map, put that in our normal mode, normal slot here. Oh, wrong one. Okay, let's see, vector bump. All right, that's a little bit better. Thank goodness for the color ramp. Yeah, not too crazy, but just crazy enough that we can Alright. Now that's kind of alright, but it's still a little bit too crazy here. On Earth, things are a little bit more open. We don't have hills that big. So let's add a little bit more variation with another noise texture. So let's see, color, mix RGB. Let's multiply these two together. Now the real problem with the noise modifier, the noise texture, is that you do never really get either that pure black or pure white, so let's add in one of these and So we just fit that in there, so we do. And there you can sort of, that's actually a pretty cool effect there. You see moving this around that now we get some of those. Now we get some of that cool variation there. And just for fun, let's add some distortion. Actually, let's add some distortion up here, too. There we go. Not looking too bad. Now there are a few different ways that we could add to this forest here. But let's see, let's move on. Now we're going to add let's add a UV sphere this time. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Shade smooth. And we're going to work on the atmosphere a little bit. Which means we're going to need a cool cloud texture, which means noise textures. Converter math. Greater than. Let's make this very distorted, but not too distorted. How about right there? To really get some interesting looking weather patterns. Zero 0.55-ish. There we go. Let's see. And on one hand, we're going to make it give it a white texture, and on the other hand, we're going to make it transparent. Let's see, on default and Eevee, the transparencies Alright, make this a little more rough. Alright, it's looking pretty good there. Got some nice weather patterns blowing through. Ta-da. Let's see, we're going to bring the noise texture into the normal map with a bump, vector bump. There we go. Okay. Now the atmosphere is obviously not this ludicrously thick, so let's try to bring it as close to the size of the planet as we can without any objects dipping into it. And it's looking pretty good there. Now, even though we added clouds, we haven't really added an atmosphere. You know, the atmosphere of Earth, it's what gives the sky its bluish color. So we need to add a little bit of volume to this atmosphere, make it so it's not just, clouds sitting on top. So we are going to add one more UV sphere to this. Shade smooth. Add one more material. Get rid of the surface and make it a volume material. Oop. Okay, it's getting a little freaky and Eevee renderer right now, but you can sort of see what what it's doing here. It's you can sort of see how it's working here. It's not creating pixels, or it's not creating polygons in the same way that the sphere is. It's creating voxels, which is basically an array of cubes of sorts, and it's choosing the color of each cube depending on where the light is and where objects near it are. It's not supposed to be a square though. So let's see if it works in cycles. Okay, yes. It does work in cycles. And it works the same way, it's just, cycles. It's a lot slower. It's not exactly real time. But at least it's not a cube. Bring the color up and there we go. Let's see. Sort of playing around with these values here. I'm not an expert in what all these do by any means. All I know is that I move these around and colors change. Now because I can see the geometry here a little bit, it sort of bunches up near the edges. I don't necessarily want that, so the solution is to smooth the edges out as much as possible. And there we go. It's a pretty decent looking planet for something that we just threw together in a couple of minutes. Oh, let's rename these objects so we don't get lost. Planet. Clouds. Atmosphere. Not atmosphere, atmosphere. Now add them as parents so that we can keep this all clean. And there we go. We can access all these things together from here. And, just as importantly, we now have a procedural planet that we can go into these material nodes and change all of these values as we will. For instance, we can control the shallowness of these oceans here. We can control how much the land is taken up by beaches, or by forests, or by mountains. We could go into these clouds here and make it make it a nice clear day, or we can make it super cloudy. And storm of the century there. Kind of looks like Florida, ha ha ha. And because it's and because all of this is procedural, we can add in as many factors as we want without really destroying everything that we see here. For instance, let's say that I want to add in one more value. Let's add a little bit of ice to these poles. So let's add in one more shader. And let's bring in these. Let's bring in this noise shader one more time. Excuse me. Because, you know, when we look at our planet, we see that a lot of the ice likes to anchor itself onto land, where we get these nice glaciers like in Greenland or in Antarctica. So just so we see what we're looking at, let's disable these two. Alright, we have our landmass of sorts here. And let's see. Let's mix the RGB a little bit with a gradient texture. Actually, just so we can see what we're doing better, let's move the gradient over here. And we can see that the default for this is a gradient along the x-axis. That is, it starts on the left side of the object and moves to the right. Not a very good place to get poles. So let's Control T to pull this out. Actually, let's keep it generated. And since we're looking at it from the y-axis, let's rotate it 90 degrees. Ah. Sorry, that was my jaw. Do not worry. Well, it's not really supposed to do that, but that's how it goes. It's not really how it goes either, but anyways. Alright, since ice gatherers are on the poles, I want this to be lighter. Alright, so now we have this thing where we can switch, where it's sort of nice and evenly blended between our landmass noise here and our poles, our distance from the equator. Put this on top and have a little overlay there, and boom. Just adding these here to make it look a little bit more interesting. Add in one more math converter here. Greater than. And boom, we have some nice little ice shelves here. And in the second shader here, let's make it principal. That's not what I meant. Add shader, principal BSDF. Switch into this mode, we can see we have a very nice little ice cap up top here, and a nice one at the bottom that clings to the that clings to these land masses here. And we can change the temperature of the planet really by controlling this little greater than volume here. This is basically an ice age. And we can, and this is us in 20 or 30 years, ha ha ha. That's actually really sad. Please be aware that global warming is a real thing. And we look at it through this, and this. Voila. Alright, now because this is going to take up so much computer data just to calculate all of these and run them through again and again and again, we're gonna bake these textures all over. So, to do that means I'm going to go into UV editing. Going to unwrap this. well, the icospheres are already unwrapped, but you can see why we don't use them so much as we do for icospheres, as we do for UV spheres. So oh, did not mean to do that. Let's see, how do I get this out of here? Let's go to the subject here. Relations. There we go. Now, because we already have the material and we can apply it to anything, it really doesn't matter if we have it on this sphere or another sphere, it'll all work the same. But since icospheres apparently don't have very good UV mesh translation, let's delete this. And let's add a UV sphere instead. Oh. And there we can see. There we can see that, yeah, we get this basically the same results. And this time we get a nice clean UV wrap that basically preserves all the shapes very well. Now that's important because we need to bake these onto textures that we can reuse on this shape. So for this one, this planet, we're going to create a new image. Let's bump this up to something that'll translate a little better. Let's see. Bring out the calculator. I like to keep these all round basic numbers that multiply easily, so 1024 times 8, that's 8192. That still might be a little bit much, but hey, this is us learning about the whole process, so actually let's actually just bring it down to 4K. So divided by 2, that's 4096. So 4096 times 4096. Turn off the alpha because we don't really need that when we're baking the colors onto this. And let's name this not planet, planet color. And we're not planet, it's planet. Now it's important that we do this in cycles because I don't think it's available in Eevee. Gonna go over to bake. Oh. First though, we're gonna go into shading. gonna add one little texture input just to image texture. Going to select our planet color texture. And we're gonna go to bake. Just gonna bake diffused. Get away from the direct lighting and indirect lighting. Those two are really useful if, say, you're making a video game room and you really want to save up on lighting data. But here we still want to add a little bit of the dynamic lighting that we get from the scene because we aren't quite done playing around yet. And let's bake. Now what baking does is it basically takes all of the data from that material that we have, and it condenses it down into a single image texture that, again, we can save, that we can save in our folders, that we can reuse again if, say, we lose all of the progress we made on this scene. And most importantly, make it create something a lot more efficient in terms of computer data that we can use over and over, that we can render over and over again without having to constantly, constantly recalculate all these different values for. All right. And there we have it, our beautiful, beautiful landmass. We have our poles here. We have our oceans and their depths all over here. Now we could probably go into a whole discussion about how these aren't accurate to some sort of tectonic or geologic process. But again, this isn't really for that. We're just sort of having fun here, sort of brainstorming as well, seeing what fun stuff we can come up with. Since we are not necessarily bored, but brain farted. And you can see this process is pretty good. 4K isn't the best resolution, but it captures most of the details, all the essential stuff that we're going for. Now it's 7 o'clock, it's time for a break, so I will bake all the other textures. Well, I'll bake all the other textures while we're waiting for the countdown to go down, and in the meantime, stretch, get some snacks, get some water, do some healthy stuff, it's good for you. And we'll be right back. And we're back. Okay. Now I wasn't able to get all of these quite done yet. I'm still working on how to get this specularity stuff in there. Let's see what this does. Wait a second, no, that doesn't make any sense. Let's try. Alright, I'm gonna try working a few things around in here, so hang on to your seats. It's gonna be crazy. Well, not super crazy. Just involves going up here. Alright, so let's see, we have that color up here. Let's mix RGB. Oh, not quite, not quite, not quite. Let's subtract. Is that right? Nope, that's not right. Okay. So let's just add this then. And this color up here, the land texture, we're going to invert. Alright, let's see, does this match up with what we had before? Looking for the land mass here. Oh. Okay, yeah, that. That. Well, I guess since we're change this to a math node. Actually, let's mix this. Mix. And there we go. Now we can make this our specular map. So let's bake this. Now, of course, you may be thinking to yourself, oh, if this is just the, if this is just artificial intelligence, you know, if this is just the, this is just the computer doing all this work, why, you know, does it even count as art? Well, first of all, this is the computer doing all this work, and it is not that great, to be perfectly honest. Hold on, let's add this shader here. It didn't quite catch that. Just a nice quick diffusion shader. And second of all, yeah, I'm one of those people who has a looser definition of art, and art is just creative expression, and if somebody wants to expressively show themselves through this extensive programming, and again, this is not extensive by any means. I've seen people create some artistic stuff that's with node trees 7 times this size. Then by all means, yeah, go ahead, show the world what you got. There we go, all right. Nice little specular map. Going to pack this into the program and save it. We're going to rename this material here Planet Procedural Base. Just so we have all the values here and we can reuse them if we need to. Save this data block even if it has no users. Clear it. And we're going to add in a new material. Planet Final. Here we're just going to bring in all of our image textures that we created. Shift D, Shift D, Shift D. Planet Bump, Planet Color, Planet Roughness, Planet Specular. We're just going to plug all these in. Gonna add a normal map converter to this one first. Rearrange these a little bit. Specular and roughness. And we could see the normal map sort of bunching itself together up there again. Discord is really active tonight. Hope you don't mind. My cat has stopped by to say hello. Say hello, Pippin. Oh yeah, my cat doesn't speak. He just speaks to me silently when I'm alone and tells me to do evil things. But anyways, yeah, now we can sort of move this around without it taking up so much data. And look, rendering is done already. We do sacrifice a little bit of the detail. You know, we can't go quite as far into the map without getting all blurry. But, you know, that's just the trade-off. And, you know, from a certain distance, say right here, we won't even really need to be going in that far. It does bunch up a little bit up there, though. That's not good. Just avoid that part when we're doing our final render. Let's play around with some of these. Let's play around with this a little bit to try to get ourselves a nice, cool looking image. Alright. That looks not so bad right there. Actually, let's do something crazy and see if we can get ourselves just a physical object sun. Oh yeah, it's ate all those values from when I added the first icosphere, so let's bump that down a little bit since the sun's going to be pretty far away. And let's call this one sun and switch it from principal to emission. Let's see if we can hide this grid really fast. Oh yeah, it just appeared. All right. So there, that gives us a pretty basic planet sun shot. Although, again, there are plenty of ways we can make this more interesting. For instance, let's see, let's make that twice as bright. Double that again. Make it a binary system. Subdivide it so that we can sort of hide the sort of hide all the edges of the icosphere. And let's double this so that we can sort of mess with the colors a little bit. Let's make this a green star and a purple star. Add a little backplane here so we can get a better look at the night side here. Now, of course, as I said before, in space you really can't see the dark side of these objects too well, since, space is black and there's nothing to really reflect all the light onto it. But again, this wasn't really supposed to be a science type thing. This is going to be a wager type thing. And here we can have all sorts of fun. Oh. Now, I wouldn't worry too much about these stars right now. They don't look super grand right now, but that's because, it's best to do all the lens effects in post-processing. Still playing around with some of the atmosphere bits here. All right. Now let's have some fun with rings. Now when we look at rings, normally we think of some of the more distant gas giants out there. But of course, that's not just limited to them. Tons of planets have rings. It's a lot of fun looking at some of those exoplanets. One of them is only two or three times the size of the Earth, but it has rings that stretch out further than our moon relative to it. Make it really flat, of course. Ugh. Add another icosphere to play the part of the asteroids. And here, let's go into geometry nodes. This was a really recent addition to Blender. I think it's only been in there since 2.9. And in the and of course in Blender 3.0 Alpha, they've really amped up a lot of its features. Part of the reason why I said it was so important to go into Excuse me. That's why I said it was so important to start it in here. Start this project in here. Okay, so let's do point distribute. Make it really dense. Change the seed a little bit. And let's see, point instance. Let's make it this icosphere 2. Now we're going to change some of the attributes here so that it doesn't look all the same. Attribute scale. Actually, while we're here, we should probably let's see, object transform. Oh gosh, what am I looking for? Convert, clean up. Again, I'm not claiming to be an expert in this by any definition of the word. So let's do a quick Google search here. Normalize scale. All right, let's try this. Alt P. No. Shoot. Wrong one. Oh. I see. Control A. Scale. There we go. See, the problem that the reason why it looked so flat was because when because it was parenting the scale of these objects here to the parent object scale. Now we can make these a little bit more make the scale a little bit more randomized, so let's make it a scale vector. That way, when it checks the randomness, it will randomize each of these based off of the individual axes. Now 0 might be a little bit too thin, so let's make this 0.05, 0.05, and 0.05. Actually, let's make this a little bit shorter. Zero 0.01, 0.05, 0.05, and 0.05. There you go. Now these are starting to look a little bit more like objects in a satellites. Let's also change the point of rotation a little bit. Nope, not integer, vector. Thankfully, the vector is a little bit simpler than full degrees. 1 is a complete rotation, 0 is starting rotation. I think we could still make these a little bit smaller. Yeah, that's a, I'd say that's a pretty solid ring. Maybe not quite so dense, just so you can see the planet a little bit better. And let's do something with the parent object. So let's add mesh. Oh wait, geometry. Join geometry. There we go. Now we get both these little rocks and the disk that we generated them from. See, let's hide these. Oh. Let's hide these lights here so that, actually let's label these so we don't lose track of them. Sun 2. Sun and Sun 2. Okay. Now we have a nice clear view of this disk here. Let's use this base material here. Clear up the specularity. Let's go into the shading editor for a little while. And let's see. Input object info. Put random in here so that we can randomize the color a little bit. Let's add a color ramp here. Actually, let's add a little bit of specularity, but let's make it a really rough specularity, just like a rock. And let's add a ring material to this one. And let's see if I can finish up the ring material before we have to close out for the day. Let's see, shader, principal volume. Okay, I think the problem is in our geometry node here. One thing about 3.0 alpha is that you have to assign materials, at least I believe so. Yeah. Actually, you know what, let's get out of this. Let's just leave this here. Let's copy this torus and select the geometry nodes, because I think it's just easier to just use this as our ring. Oh boy, this is really buggy. Not quite sure what's going on here. So I guess we could get rid of this principal volume stuff and just let's just make this a diffuse shader for now. Not super pretty, but we can change it up a little bit with the mix shader. Thankfully, it's a lot easier to deal with than the volume shader, so this time we might actually get it done before we finish it up. Before we finish up the stream today. Alright, let's make a texture, gradient texture. Alright, converter color ramp. That way we get a nice little fade in and fade out. So let's change this from a transmission shader to a translucent shader. That way we get a better look at what's on the other side. Maybe not. Shader. Oh, that's why I had it backwards. Not to worry, I was just being a dork, I was just being a dork. Now we can feed this in here. Actually, we can make this the vector input for another noise generator. Alright. Add a quick translucent shader onto this. That's a lot better for things like skin tone and such, but as you can see here, gives us a nice view of the backside. Okay, I seem to have messed with the cinematography a little bit, so let's see, where did the suns go? Up there they are. Pull it back a little bit. Make it a little bit more exciting. Ooh, speaking of exciting, something really interesting is happening out there. Alright. Cool, let's give this a test render and see how it looks. Let's see, what are all my render settings set to? Cool. And yeah, that actually looks really nice. Do some really quick compositing here to give you a brief glimpse of what the final product is going to look like. So add output viewer. Let's see. Filter glare. And that's what it's going to look like with the binary star system in the background and the rings at the front. Again, this was a very, very simple show off, not quite a direct tutorial on how to make the best science fiction planets ever. Just, again, something to brainstorm a little bit to sort of get your mind going when you're stuck in a rut. I personally really like how this one turned out in that respect, though, and I imagine I'll carry this one over to a more finalized render to I don't know, maybe show off on my blog. Not really my final portfolio, but yeah, thanks everybody for watching. If you find this on YouTube, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel for some more weekly stream updates. And please visit our websites at thedanwasia.blogspot.com or our more professional portfolio, thedanwasia.art.com. Alright, thanks again for hopping on, and I hope to see you next week. Thanks for viewing. Goodbye.